organisations often spend a lot of time and energy working on culture, and that some organisations find it so challenging they don't even want to talk about their culture because it's so difficult. Because culture is complex. It's the collective sets of behaviours, it's the social norms, it's the mental mindsets that prevail across the organisation. And to some degree, there is no such thing, I think, as culture, because everyone is unique and different, and everyone has their own sets of behaviours. But clearly, at some level, those behaviours become aggregated into social norms. And when you go into an organisation, it doesn't take long to pick up the cues to figure out how are things done around here. I always think, when you see how people treat, say, receptionists, that's a really good indication of the kind of culture that exists in an organisation, even when you're sitting in the foyer of the company offices. So culture is something that organisations either choose to completely ignore, or they invest huge amounts of energy trying to figure out how they can optimise the culture. And there's lots of really good reasons. We know the performance of the organisation and the people there is massively impacted by the culture that exists. We know that organisations with healthy cultures tend to have high-performing teams. We know that organisations with poor cultures tend to really struggle to retain and attract people into their organisations. So culture is by definition a differentiator. If you look at the sort of value of organisations, sort of increasingly how organisations are valued in monetary terms is much more about their intangible assets, and the productivity of their people is clearly one of those intangible assets. So there is a bottom line reason why having a good culture is a good idea. But as I said, culture is incredibly complex. So many organisations struggle to find simple access points without spending huge amounts of money trying to figure their culture out. So I use a frame with organisations when I'm sort of consulting and asking them about their culture. One of the access points I use is really this concept of how much permission exists within the organisation to be autonomous. I'm really curious often about that because that gives you an indication of the wider culture. And I use the phrase must, should, may. So I ask organisations often, okay, so if you think about your culture and how you operate and how you run things, what are the things that you absolutely mandate? What are your musts? What are the things that all the organisation is really clear, this is the way it must be? And assuming you've got those things, what are your sanctions? What's your approach if people don't follow that must? And that really starts to drive a really interesting conversation around the levels of trust, empowerment. It will vary obviously by industry. If you're in a high reliability organisation like you're in sort of nuclear processing, or you're in oil and gas or petrochemicals, there'll be huge amount of must. There'll be regulatory compliance things, but there'll also be the musts that the organisation imposes upon its people. So I'm really curious about this idea of what are the musts of that organisation, and importantly, what happens when those musts are not followed. What are the consequences? What are the sanctions? When we've got the musts, I say, okay, then what are your shoulds? What are the areas of your culture, your organisation, where you say you're giving guidance? You'll say, okay, this is the must. This is a should. We're recommending that you do these following things. So how are those shoulds created? How are they shared? And again, how are they adopted? And again, this gives an indication then about really the capability of the organisation, because when you've said, well, it's not a should, it's not a must, it's a should, then really you're relying then on people taking action and exercising some kind of judgment. When it's a must, there's no judgment required. That is the rule. You must follow the rule. As soon as you get into shoulds, it's really then about judgment. You get to see then how people make decisions in the organisation. You get to see the capability of the organisation, and you get to see the pockets of where things seem to happen. So people do the shoulds, but where don't they? So I'm really interested in shoulds. And then the last area is this idea of may. So may is, okay, we've defined the musts, the rules, we've given you a sense of the guidance to shoulds. May now is really trying to describe all the other areas then that you are heavily or highly empowered. And again, this gives an indication to organisations to say, well, to what degree are they happy to let people go and do whatever they want to do within this May area. And that speaks to things like creativity, it speaks to things like innovation, it speaks to things like wider trust, and it also, so I guess, reinforces the empowerment. So I like to have conversations early on in culture chats to ask your organisation, talk about your musts, your shoulds and your mays, and from there I tend to find that can be a very useful frame then in terms of you're then moving forward and so you're creating new policies. Certainly if you're looking to change the culture and change, say, policies and approaches and certain processes, then being really clear of your must, should and your mays can really help. I hope that was useful. Thank you.